Pokemon Champions made competitive Pokemon the most accessible it has ever been. And in the end, it didn't matter. If we count the 6 Pokemon on your team, no moves, no items, no stat changes, with the limited roster of only 187 Pokemon, there are over 54.7 billion unique Pokemon teams in Pokemon Champions. Now add the stat spread. Each Pokemon gets up to 66 total stat points across 6 stats ranging from 0 to 32. That's 10 million ways to build a single Pokemon. Now, multiply that by 21 different natures and you have 210 million configurations per Pokemon for each of the 6 Pokemon on a team on those 54.7 billion unique teams. All it takes is each Pokemon being able to learn just 23 moves, and they all learn far more. But just 23 moves to choose your 4 moves from is all it takes for the number of possible Pokemon teams to be greater than the number of individual atoms in the observable universe. And that's before we talk items. Despite competitive Pokemon being the simplest and most approachable it has ever been, it is still impossible to solve. So instead of solving it, I'm going to try exploiting it. And the proving grounds for this test, only the largest Pokemon tournament ever organized, the Grand Champions Festival. If I can lock down just one piece of this puzzle, the number of possibilities shrink dramatically. So I want to find that one piece that most players are missing or unaware of and build there. And when I frame it like that, that's really just finding market inefficiencies, something that people in finance have been doing for decades. So why don't I just steal from them? And I did, in the form of the Sharpe Ratio. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but for our purposes, the Sharpe Ratio measures how much you get from something divided by how volatile it is. In finance, that's how much money you make relative to the risk. Think of high Sharpe as mutual funds or ETFs, low risk, high return. And a low Sharpe, well, that's like going to the casino. You'll always hear stories of someone walking out of Vegas with millions in their pocket, but that's only because someone else lost millions in the process. High risk, and maybe it pays off, but probably not. In Pokemon, a high Sharpe would, in theory, look like a tournament-winning team, something that few people had on their radar, so it's not highly countered yet, and capable of consistently winning lots and lots of games. A low Sharpe would look like someone rolling in with all one-hit KO moves. Sure, 1 in 100 games, you hit all 4 in a row and win, but good luck doing that 2 out of 3 games to win the match, and then repeating that over several rounds. It could happen, but I'm personally not trying to bank on that strategy. So to build this framework, we need 3 things: the expected outcome, the baseline outcome, and volatility. But of what? Well, luckily, we're currently in a format that can be boiled down to just one big lever, the Mega Evolution. So in Pokemon, we call the baseline outcome 50%. Any 2 players randomly matching up into each other has a 50-50 chance of winning. But we know that's not always true. Based on the team, the player skill, and a bunch of other factors, one player has an advantage. That player wins more than 50% of the time. This is where we can use the data available on Limitless to look at the expected win rate. And we don't want to just look at full teams of 6 because that's too specific and all the results would be volatile. But instead, specifically which Mega Evolution is winning more than 50% of the time. So we take that win rate, minus 50%, and that's the top part of our equation. But how much more do we need to be winning than just 50%? Well, in most official tournaments, you need to win at least 6 of the 8 rounds in day 1 to make day 2. That means at the absolute bare minimum, you would need a win rate no worse than 54.5%. That assumes every match win goes to game 3, and you win those with a game record of 2-1, and both of your losses are clean sweeps by your opponent at 0-2. But due to the size of the Grand Champions Festival, we need to win 7 of 9 rounds to advance onto day 2. That raises the minimum win rate from 54 to 56%. But we aren't trying to just skate by, we want to win. And in a format where each match is the best 2 out of 3, the minimum win percentage for an undefeated run is 67%. But in reality, for a 9-round tournament, 67% only gets you about a coin flip's chance to make it to day 2. You would actually need a win rate of 70% to comfortably expect to advance. So that's our target. No worse than 67%, but trying to push our win rate above 70%. And to find the exact Mega Pokemon capable of carrying this run, we need to finish building the bottom part of our Sharpe formula. And the bottom is the variance. It's how volatile this Pokemon is in practice. Something like Mega Aerodactyl that beats Mega Charizard basically every time they play might look like a good pick, but if Charizard is only 10% of the field, and Mega Aerodactyl actually loses to virtually every other Mega, well, that's the same as you trying to string together lucky runs at the casino or win with one-hit KO moves. This time, you're just hoping to see Mega Charizard every round. It could work, but is it really worth it? Especially if there's a Pokemon that wins every matchup between 50 and 60% of the time. Sure, you have fewer free wins, but likely more wins by the end of the tournament compared to just hoping for the perfect matchup every time. And that's what we're looking for. Lots of wins into the current field and really consistent when doing so. And at the top of that ranking system, by margin, was Mega Scizor. On screen is a scatter plot of every Mega with at least 100 matches registered in the Limitless database. Usage rate versus win rate. Mega evolutions lower on the graph perform worse, and those further to the right are more common. So Mega Gyarados is rightfully used very little, as it is the worst performing Mega in the dataset. While Mega Floette, to no one's surprise, is the most used Mega evolution and has one of the highest win rates to back up that usage stat. But you'll notice the Pokemon with the highest win rate is Mega Scizor at a mere 2% usage rate. Not just that, but even Mega Skarmory with just a 0.5% has the 4th highest win rate of any Mega on this list. That's not noise. That's signal that physical steel types in a format where Floette is the most popular Mega evolution are winning more than their usage rates suggest. To once again steal from finance, they're overperforming in the market. But identifying a Mega is just step one. We've got 5 other teammates that we need to identify on this team. How do we figure out who pairs best with Mega Scizor? To figure that out, I looked at win rates of Mega Scizor when it had a particular partner versus when it didn't. And the 2 most common partners for Mega Scizor, Incineroar and Pelipper, pretty obvious choices to help cover for Scizor's fire weakness, were both negative partners. Not only did Scizor have the highest win rate, but its 2 most common partners were actively dragging it down. That means Scizor could be an even better pick if we can isolate where that extra win rate is coming from, and that would be the real edge. And that edge was something that exists for almost every Mega in the format: Sneasler, Basculegion, and Kingambit. Take a look at these numbers. Sneasler, the most common Pokemon in the format, the Pokemon that found itself on over 3,000 teams in the Grand Champions Festival, has a 48.2% win rate in isolation. That's right, the most common Pokemon in the format is actually a liability on its own. Kingambit has a 49% win rate, and only Basculegion is somewhat positive at 50.5%. Now what happens when we start adding more of these Pokemon on a team? Starting with Basculegion and Kingambit, our 2 highest individual win rates, will obviously perform the best when combined onto a single team, right? Well, teams with Basculegion and Kingambit but no Sneasler win 52.5% of the time. That's a notable improvement from either of them individually. And if we flash back to our Mega rankings, would rank as our 5th strongest Mega evolution, just ahead of Mega Frostlass. That's really good considering it didn't even require a Mega Stone. So what about Sneasler? Well, Sneasler and Basculegion win at a 54.7% rate. That's more than Mega Floette, while Sneasler and Kingambit win at a 56.5% rate. That's more than Mega Scizor, topping our chart. How is that possible? Sneasler went from underperforming the field by itself to now being the secret ingredient, winning more often than any Mega evolution in the game. Well, to understand that, let's look at what happens when all 3 of these Pokemon are present on the same team. And in the 1,000 matches from the Limitless database that I was able to see with all 3 of these Pokemon on that team, these teams won at a rate of 58.7%. That is the highest win rate we've seen by margin. That alone is capable of getting you into day 2 with just a little bit of luck. So what's happening? Well, have you ever noticed that most well-performing teams have a fire type, a grass type, and a water type? Whether that's Incineroar, Rillaboom, and Urshifu, or really throwing it back, Arcanine, Gyarados, and Amoonguss. This is well known as the Fire, Water, Grass core because each Pokemon covers for the other's weakness. These 3 together make it really difficult for your opponent to have the proper answer into your team at any point in time because the answer to one is threatened by the other. And this is actually one of 4 perfect type triangles in the game, but more on that later. Basculegion, Kingambit, and Sneasler form their own sort of type triangle. Sneasler beats Kingambit, who beats Basculegion, who beats Sneasler. Sneasler's close combat can one-shot Kingambit while resisting Kingambit's dark moves. Kingambit's Sucker Punch can one-shot Basculegion while also resisting Basculegion's last respects. And Basculegion's ghost typing resists or is immune to Sneasler's only moves and can one-shot it with a Wave Crash. These 3 accidentally created a functional core that can prop up almost any team, winning 12% more often than teams without them. So what does that mean for our Mega Scizor team? What was the real edge that I uncovered in the data? Kingambit. Kingambit added the most win rate at nearly 16% compared to Mega Scizor teams that didn't have it. And I suspect that's because Kingambit's steel typing felt like it was doubling up with Scizor's and created an extra fire weakness. not something you want when Charizard Y is on 1 in 6 teams. So most players likely defaulted to the Pelipper and Incineroar option we discussed earlier, but that was nothing but a trap. You see, Kingambit, who is threatened by Sneasler and threatens Basculegion, is filling a functionally different role than Scizor in this format. Scizor threatens Sneasler, capable of knocking it out with a well-placed Bullet Punch, while taking close combat for neutral despite it being a Steel type. And Basculegion resists both Scizor's Bullet Punch and Bug Bite, two different Steel types that perfectly cover for each other's weaknesses within the format. Basculegion and Sneasler were both positive partners for Scizor, but just less so because they showed up on more Scizor teams than Kingambit did. But when all three of these Pokemon function together, perfectly complementing each other's weaknesses, well, now we're really cooking with fire. In fact, Scizor and Kingambit teams had a base win rate of 65% and a ceiling of 75% depending on their partners. That puts us right around our target range of 67 to 70% with some real upside. But there was one other Pokemon that added significant win percentage to Scizor. Not as much as Kingambit, but more than any other Pokemon, and had never been used with Scizor and Kingambit simultaneously until now. This was the secret tech that if I could pull off and work seamlessly into the rest of the team, would take Mega Scizor to undiscovered heights. And this Pokemon? Well, it's not the king of VGC Incineroar, who we already figured out was holding Scizor back, but the return of the old king. Before Incineroar had Intimidate and Parting Shot, there was one fire type who ruled: Arcanine. It is very hard to justify running Arcanine in a format where Incineroar exists. They're both fire types with Intimidate and Flare Blitz and nearly identical stats. Incineroar is slower than Arcanine, but that's usually framed as a good thing because this lower speed lets Parting Shot move last, giving you a free switch in when you need it. And Incineroar's additional bulk makes this strategy even better. But Arcanine gets access to one move that Incineroar doesn't, and it's part of what makes this set just so good. Arcanine's mono fire typing means it has one fewer weakness than Incineroar. They both share Fire's water, rock, and ground weaknesses, but Incineroar has the additional fighting weakness thanks to its dark typing. And in a field full of Sneasler, that's not really ideal. But this mono fire typing is also incredibly valuable when paired with the move Burn Up, a move that Incineroar doesn't have access to, and even if it did, wouldn't function the same as Arcanine. You see, Burn Up is a base 130 move with perfect accuracy. It's as strong as Overheat, but never misses and doesn't drop your special attack stat as a penalty. Instead, it completely removes the Pokemon's fire typing. So if Incineroar were to use Burn Up, it would just become a regular old dark type. It would keep its weakness to fighting, but it would actually gain weakness to bug and fairy in the process. That's not really what we're going for, especially when Floette is the most used mega in the format. Instead, when Arcanine uses Burn Up, it removes all of its weaknesses. Arcanine's faster speed than Incineroar lets it fire off a Burn Up before most threats have the opportunity to attack, removing its fire typing and any weaknesses that come with it. So if you're facing down something like a Charizard where you actually want that fire typing for resistance, we can use Will-O-Wisp to burn our opponents, further reducing their attack stat, or in the case of Charizard and other special attackers that would threaten Scizor, we can use Snarl and drop their special attack stat while chipping them for damage, bringing them closer and closer to within range of a Bullet Punch knockout. Arcanine really felt like the perfect underrated partner for the most underrated mega, and the data backed it up. This was going to be the team, but we still needed one more Pokemon to finish off our team of 6. But who? Well, the best Scizor and Kingambit teams had Sneasler, Basculegion, and Sinistcha. And the best Scizor and Arcanine teams? They also had Sneasler, Basculegion, and Sinistcha. I didn't have to choose a 6th member, the data did. Mega Scizor earned its place by being the one mega with the highest win rate. Kingambit found its way onto the team because it lifted Mega Scizor teams to their highest potential. Sneasler and Basculegion completed the structural backbone that made Kingambit really worth running. Arcanine was the untested piece in this structure, but independently produced the best results for Mega Scizor just behind Kingambit. And Sinistcha? Well, Sinistcha was the piece both builds ended up pointing back to. It rounded out our very own Firewater Grass Core, had a fantastic matchup into both Milotic and Rotom Wash, and the passive healing paired brilliantly with Arcanine's damage reduction, just helping keep the team healthy while we slowly chip away at our opponent before we finish the game with a barrage of priority moves. The Scizor and Arcanine teams had a win rate of around 73%. The Scizor and Kingambit branch ranged anywhere from 65 to 75% depending on partners. Two completely separate team starting points converging around the same core and achieving similar win rates. That's a really solid tournament team. which is exactly why after a few games on Showdown, finishing 16-5, which is more than 75% win rate for those of you at home, which included this loss to a Milotic, despite being up 3 Pokemon to 1 due to a timer stall, that's definitely not foreshadowing, and locking in a GXE of 67%, which is just a fancy predicted win rate based on performance, I was feeling incredibly confident. The real results were confirming the build's win rate, right in our desired range to enter the largest tournament ever. And building on that confidence, I entered tournament day ready for anything. Anything except Bright Powder. And that's how all of this prep work turned into a 1-2 start. And before I get too ahead of myself, this isn't supposed to be a tournament recap. I'm just gonna cover the highlights. We're gonna talk about the things that worked, things that didn't, and the things that I would change, because believe me, there are things that I would change. So in round 1, I drew a really advantageous matchup, a dual mega team of Meganium and Tyranitar, both of which Scizor is favored against. And game 1 plays out exactly how you'd think. Clean and easy win. And it actually revealed something to me about what people were doing to get around Sneasler and why Arcanine was such a fantastic Pokemon for this tournament. You see, with Sneasler being the most popular Pokemon in the format, you need an answer to it, especially for my opponent's team, who had not 1, but 2 Megas, both of which were double weak to Sneasler. Meganium would never survive Sneasler's Dire Claw, and Tyranitar was always going down to a close combat. So the solution for my opponent, and many others in the tournament? Aegislash. Aegislash's Ghost and Steel typing made it immune to all of Sneasler's attacks, meaning not only was it a great partner for both Megas, but if my opponent could ever pilot the game to a 1v1 between Aegislash and Sneasler, they automatically won. And that's a scary proposition. My opponent only ever had to take 3 knockouts to win the game, while I always had to take 4. As long as they have Aegislash, I'm fighting an uphill battle. But like I teased earlier, this is where Arcanine really found its stride. Every Aegislash that I saw, both in the tournament and on stream, was a physical attacker. That meant Arcanine's Intimidate would do wonders for slowing down its damage output. And notably, Arcanine being a special attacker, it's not concerned about Aegislash's signature move King Shield. If you're unaware, King Shield acts just like Protect, making Aegislash immune to damage, but it also drops the physical attack stat of any Pokemon that is unlucky enough to attack into it. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, that sounds really strong. It is, but there's a catch, and there's a mechanic about King Shield that most players are unaware of. King Shield only stops damaging moves. Status moves bypass it free and clear, so our Arcanine's Will-O-Wisp is always free into Aegislash. We outspeed it, threaten it with huge damage from burn up, but just in case our opponent wants to protect Aegislash and save it for later by either switching it out or protecting with King Shield, our Will-O-Wisp into that slot is unchallenged. And it's this mechanic that helped me win game 1 so decisively. But then my opponent made an adjustment. They dropped Aegislash, and the Pokemon that took its place would haunt me for the rest of the tournament, Milotic. Now, Milotic isn't really the problem. Sure, its competitive ability makes it so that if I intimidate it with Arcanine, its damage output really starts to ramp up. But outside of that scenario, it's really not packing that much of a punch. It is, however, capable of ruining my tournament run with Scald Burns, over and over again. And my opponent, over the course of the next 2 games, would use Scald 3 times into a Pokemon that wasn't burned, and all 3 times, that Pokemon ended the turn with a burn. Again, not the end of the world. We've got Swords Dance on both Scizor and Kingambit, and Sinistcha handles Milotic in the endgame. I just needed a little more time to set up and let my damage catch back up. But while I was doing that, my opponent was setting up a substitute with a Sandveil, Bright Powder, Garchomp. Now, my pitiful damage output had to hit Garchomp not once, but twice, with enough damage to break the substitute, and then again with enough damage to knock out Garchomp, while only having a 72% chance of connecting with any given move. It was just too much, and I lost the next 2 games. And this revealed a pretty serious flaw in the team. It was capable of taking hits, surviving and dishing back big damage, and the sustain from Sinistcha meant that any damage that was done could be undone. But the secondary effects, those couldn't be undone. When you build a team that is capable of taking hits, that also means it's capable of being burned, capable of being flinched, paralyzed, poisoned, or have stats dropped from secondary effects. You are inherently putting yourself in the crosshairs of RNG. So this isn't me complaining about bad luck. It's me saying that in team building, this is something that I neglected entirely. This team doesn't have speed control. It doesn't have misty terrain. It doesn't have any tools that would have prevented my opponent's Milotic from burning the entire team given enough time. It just so happened that in this match, enough time was only 3 turns. But that's okay. We're allowed to lose games and even matches and still win the tournament. And round 2 was a decisive 2-0 victory against a Mega Gardevoir team. Once again, a Mega that Scizor has a positive matchup into. 2 rounds in, and the team drew 3 Megas with a positive matchup, winning 60% of its games, still very much in the running. And then, round 3. And once again, Bright Powder. This time, it was on a Rotom Wash, and I lost this round 0-2 into a Mega Frostlass team. Once again, a positive matchup for Scizor, so much so that my opponent left it on the bench both games. So at least we're doing that right. But it was a much closer match than the record would suggest. In both games, Rotom Wash dodged a crucial attack that allowed it to fire off a Volt Switch that in game 1 knocked out my Sneasler instead of Rotom being knocked out itself, and in game 2, avoiding a flip turn from Basculegion that turned into my Basculegion eating a Volt Switch for breakfast that removed it as a win condition for me in that game. 2 different 10% chances dramatically turning the tide, and the team's 60% win rate came crashing right back down to 42%. Ouch. But then, magic. 8 wins in a row over 4 rounds, and suddenly this 1-2 start was a 5-2 Cinderella run, and that win rate back up to 73%, right where we wanted it. The team was running exactly as designed. No drama, no close calls, just the data playing out in clean wins and positive matchups for Scizor. And then, my Lodic returned. This time, I was ready, and Sinistcha was going to be the MVP it was always meant to be into my Lodic. Until it missed 2 Matcha Gotchas. Never got the burn, and once again, I'm staring down at my Lodic that could not miss a Scald Burn. Despite it all, I was in a winning position and could win the game on timer. I just needed to end the game on a Matcha Gotcha so that my Lodic's HP was lower than my Sinistcha's, and I win the game. Except Sinistcha missed 1 last Matcha Gotcha. 3 in total on 13 attempts for a 90% accurate move. And that was it. My opponent could end the game on a Protect with more HP and take the game on timer. But that was game 1 and I was undeterred. And as fate would have it, over the course of all 3 games, my opponent's Milotic used Scald 9 times into a Pokemon that could be burned and successfully burned them 8 times. That means I was 11 of 12 in this tournament for turn 1 Milotic Scald Burns, which is only a 30% chance each. Which is pretty crazy. But all I needed was 1. And on game 3, turn 1, I committed to using Swords Dance with both Scizor and Kingambit to at least mitigate the burn damage that was surely coming and at least have something that could answer back at +2. My Lodic used Scald into Scizor. I braced for the burn that was surely coming, but it never did. That was my 1 for 9, and it was all I needed. Between Kingambit's Sucker Punch and Scizor's Bullet Punch, nothing was standing in the way of this priority barrage, and it was on to round 9 with a record of 6-2. 1 more win and I would qualify for day 2. And that game win rate, holding strong at 72%. Despite the bumpy start and a rough finish, things were looking exactly as expected. Maybe just a little too as expected. My round 9 and final opponent of day 1 was running Charizard Y, but crucially, without Milotic. Instead, they were running for Farigiraf. This would shut down all of my team's priority moves, but both Scizor and Kingambit were threatening one-hit knockouts into it with Bug Bite and Kowtow Cleave. Farigiraf also wasn't doing any real damage to Scizor and Kingambit since it was only carrying normal and psychic moves. I wasn't worried. That also meant our Arcanine was free to snarl and chip and cripple our opponent's Charizard until it was no longer a threat to Kingambit or Scizor. In game 1, played out exactly that way. My opponent recognized this and kept Charizard in the back, trying to remove Arcanine with Kingambit and Farigiraf to set up for the Charizard sweep. But it never came. Arcanine did its job picking up the KO into a burned Kingambit with a huge burn up, and my Kingambit was free and clear to Sucker Punch Charizard once Farigiraf was removed. 1-0. Just 1 more win, and I'm on to day 2 with a game win percentage of over 70%, but it never came. My opponent adapted and led Charizard. The combination of fake tears and Tailwind from Whimsicott with a Farigiraf in the back to deflect my priority barrage was just too much. Too many mind games, too many what ifs, and I folded, dropping the next 2 games. I ended up needing Dire Claw to either paralyze or put Charizard to sleep. After an entire tournament of watching RNG swing against me, I was now the one hoping for it, needing it. And when you're in that position, well, you've already lost. 2 clean, well-played games for my opponent, and the tournament run ends with a 6-3 finish. 67% match win rate off the back of a 14-7 game record, which is also a 67% game win rate. Suspiciously identical to my GXE from Showdown and my projected win rate going into the tournament. I wanted to win at least 2 out of every 3 games, and I did. Despite it feeling like a failure in the moment, I think I'd have to call this test a success. The team performed exactly how I built it to, exactly how I projected it to, and exactly how my practice said it would do. Everything said this team would win 67% of its games. And it did. That just happens to have the range of anything from an undefeated tournament run down to a 6-3 bubble finish. I, unfortunately, fell into the latter bucket. So now with the power of hindsight, what would I change? Well, ironically, the first Pokemon to go would be Basculegion. Despite building out what appeared to be an ironclad case for this fish, there's another Pokemon that fits the exact same role. It beats Sneasler, loses to Kingambit, but also provides our team with speed control, and can beat Charizard without its strongest move getting weakened in the sun. And its name is Aerodactyl. Here's what staring too closely at the numbers cost me. Every Scizor team that did well was built around the same core: Sneasler, Basculegion, and Sinistcha. I added Kingambit and Arcanine, two Pokemon that independently added the most win rate of any one of Scizor's partners that had never been used together on the same team, without looking at what either was replacing. If I rebuild the same type triangle that I did for Basculegion, Sneasler, and Kingambit, but substitute Basculegion for Aerodactyl, the same structure holds. Not only that, but the trio of Sneasler, Kingambit, and Aerodactyl has the better win rate. And on every single overperforming Scizor team was a rock type. Either Tyranitar or Aerodactyl showed up on almost every overperforming Scizor team. I missed the obvious. The data told me they were each a positive partner, but it was muted because they were each covering the other's tracks. I would still want Arcanine and Kingambit. They both did their jobs beautifully, but Basculegion was redundant with Aerodactyl, and I chose the wrong partner. Aerodactyl was always the right answer. The other correction is Sinistcha. Not because it was bad, it served its role perfectly. It just so happened that it was the key piece to a losing strategy. Relying on the sustain and longevity meant that the team was more susceptible to RNG, and with only 2 moves on the team with random secondary effects, this was always a losing proposition. I'm asking to play a game that I can't even participate in, and the results of the data back this up. Not a single Sinistcha made top cut of the Grand Champions Festival. Across multiple megas, the Sinistcha strategy was destined to come up short. Instead, I'd want to add a second Mega Evolution. Because we have such a limited item pool in Pokemon Champions right now, the opportunity cost for running a second Mega is almost nothing, especially next to Scizor, who unlike Frostlass or Charizard, doesn't need the Mega Evolution to do what it does best. Because of this, I've been working on a way to help identify what the best possible Mega Duo is. It's still a work in progress, but right now, it actually looks like it's Scizor and Floette. So if I had to enter this tournament again, knowing what I know now, the team would look like this: Scizor, Arcanine, Floette, Kingambit, Sneasler, and Aerodactyl. But what about our Firewater Grass core? Remember when I said there were 4 perfect type triangles? Well, our previous team only had 1. This new configuration, it trades in 1 perfect type triangle for 2, replacing Firewater Grass with Rock, Flying, Fighting, and Fire, Steel, Rock. And the methodology that got me here, using finance equations to solve Pokemon, well, I'd say it worked. It didn't win the tournament, but it predicted exactly how I would do. And I think that distinction matters. 67% going in, 67% coming out. Could it produce a tournament winning team? I think so, and I'm gonna keep testing it. But for most of you, that's not the right question. The more useful question is, what's the best team that you can build around the Pokemon you actually wanna play with? Because that's what this actually does. It finds the best partner for any Pokemon. Whether you're chasing a regional win or you just want to be known as the Mammothswine Professor in Pokemon Champions. In future formats, they won't be so easily boiled down to just a single Pokemon like the Mega Evolution. So actually what this experiment really did was find the most efficient way for you to win with your favorites. So if you made it this far, drop a comment down below. Tell me what Pokemon you want to know how to win with. I can't cover all of them, but the most popular Pokemon are going to get the exact same treatment that Scizor got. And if you're curious about what random Pokemon I ended up building around, you can check that video out here. And if I'm not pointing at anything, it means it hasn't happened yet. And so if that's the case, you can check out this video here that YouTube's convinced you'll like. Either way, I'll see you there.